You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Allan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Today, John Harris and I are getting down to business. Topic of the day, photo accessories. Now, this may not sound as exciting as riding the cyclone at Coney Island, but let me tell you something. At B&H Photo, accessories and the ability to keep a massive inventory of a variety of accessories in stock is just one of the reasons B&H is the professional source. If you need it, yeah, we probably got it. But today's episode won't necessarily be about the more obscure accessories we have floating around, but an overview of accessories that are fundamental to an active photo practice. And to help us in our journey, we've invited photographer and B&H Explorer's Top Gun writer, how do you like that, Todd, huh? Todd Vorenkamp to join us. Todd, welcome.
Thank you, Allan. Always good to be here.
It's always good to have you. Todd recently edited a great article on the Explorer's site titled, "What Photo Accessory Can You Not Live Without?" In which we got feedback on favorite accessories from a range of photographers and even celebrities like Allan Weitz of B&H Photo Podcast.
That was a tough grab, but we got it.
I understand it's politics. I understand. Anyway, so along with Todd, we're going to go through an outline of accessory categories and discuss each one. And of course, we look forward to hearing from you, our listeners, about your favorite accessories, and no doubt a few of the ones we forgot to mention on the show today. But don't tell us all about the lenses we forgot, because that's an episode's worth of chatter right there. And yes, that's not a bad idea for another show. Lenses we can't live without. Anyway, without going any further, Todd, welcome back to the show. And let us start on camera supports, tripods, monopods, grips. It's number one on your list here.
It is number one on my list. I think the tripod is probably the only accessory you can buy that will immediately make your photography better. The ability to stabilize your camera will help your image sharpness, regardless of what kind of lens you're using or what kind of camera. The process of putting the camera on a tripod, taking a photograph becomes more methodical when you use a tripod, and you put more thought into each image, and that alone can also help make the photo better.
Yeah, I agree on every single point. One of the things I also really appreciate about having a tripod is that even if it's a tiny pocket camera, when you put your camera on that tripod, you could walk away from it to look at something from a different angle, a different perspective, check out something, move something around, adjust things, come back and your camera hasn't moved. You can't do that with a monopod, okay? Image stabilization won't do that. I don't care how stable it is. You can't walk away from the camera. And it gives a different perspective. And yeah, it slows you down, which is important.
Yeah, I think depends on what type of photography you're into, but there's the romantic notion of the street photographer roaming the urban jungle, shooting from the hip, being fluid, being able to pop the camera when needed. And the tripod doesn't really work for that type of photography. But a lot of us love doing landscape photography and travel photography. And when you're thinking about those types or making those types of photographs, the tripod becomes a great accessory to have, even if it's the middle of the day and it's super bright. Just being able to get yourself that extra stability is often the difference between a slightly sharp photo and a tack sharp photo.
Yeah, no, great. And by the way, even if you don't feel like taking a large tripod with you, the stability of a small table tripod that could be rested on a step, a stone, a shelf, the edge of a tree or a fence, or even your chest, and use it as a chest pod, and use, you have like 5-point contact with your camera. That adds a good element of stability. And I also like using, in addition to a small table tripod that I'll always be using carrying with me, some of the flat plate types like platypods. Those are really, really neat, especially if you have a small a ball head to put onto it. First of all, ground level shooting, it's terrific. And also just to press against something, attach it to something. there are a lot of items, a lot of platforms, stones, walls, steps, columns, fences that you can stabilize a camera on if you have even a small, again, like a platypod, table pod, or something like that.
Right. The Gorilla Pods are designed to, they have like flexible legs to wrap around posts and railings and things like that.
Yes.
If you're traveling, you don't want to have a heavy tripod that gets left back in the hotel room or becomes a literal drag on your gear.
Mm-hmm.
But the caveat there is the heavier the tripod, the more stable your camera is going to be.
Yes.
The opposite part is the heavier the tripod, the less likely you are to bring it with you and schlep it around town, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So you have to find that happy medium between weight for stability and convenience of portability. I went to Europe years ago with a very lightweight, I think it was a Benro Travel Angel, which is a great tripod with a pretty significant payload capacity. But I was in Europe during a week of horrible weather and high winds, and the tripod would have been totally fine if there was no breeze, but it was blowing 20, and everything came out blurry.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
So what do you guys use right now for your tripods? And also, let's talk a little bit about the two major types. You have aluminum and you have carbon fiber. So what do you think about those?
Yeah, I think that's important to mention too, because carbon fiber has several advantages. First of all, it's easily a third lighter than aluminum on average. And another thing I like about it, especially this time of year here in New England, is that you could handle it in cold weather. It doesn't transmit cold just like aluminum does. It stays kind of neutral. So it's easier to handle in real cold weather. The ones I'm currently using right now, it's a mid-range Benro. I forget the model of it. It's several years old. It's probably already been updated a little bit. I have several ball heads from several manufacturers that I use. And I try to carry that with me whenever I can, whenever it's possible. And also, I think having a tripod bag or a tripod strap is a valuable thing to have with that. I also use a Leica mini tripod that I bought 40 years ago. And I have two Leica ball heads, one taller than the other. And again, I bought all these used over the years. I take them all the time. They're rock solid. And I also do carry a smaller platypod with a real small ball head, or use one of the Leica ball heads on it. And I could, again, between those three, I could do anything. And if I leave the tripod itself back home or in the hotel or wherever, or home, between the Leica table pod and my platypod, I can do an awful lot.
Hi, I'm Todd. I have a tripod problem. I think I have 7 tripods, maybe 8. I have a super heavy aluminum Manfrotto that I have a spotting scope mounted on. It's basically a large format studio tripod. I have a wooden Reese tripod.
Beautiful.
Which, it's gorgeous. It's more of a piece of furniture, but I use it as a tool, so it has scratches and has gotten faded over the years. But I believe that was the type of tripod Ansel Adams used. My main tripods, I have 3 Enduros. One has like the flat plate top where you can interchange the different types of head mounting systems. Mm-hmm. And then I have 2 that have standard telescoping center columns. One is a 3-section and one is a 4-section. And the 4-section is more of my travel tripod. It leans more towards a full-size tripod than a traditional travel size, but I deal with the extra weight because I want the extra stability. And I have a handful of heads.
I've gone having 6-section tripods that really fold up real small, and they really do come up tall, but they're not stable.
Right. I'm a big fan of the 3-section. I think that's the great. That's the best number to have for stability.
By the way, also another thing, just to add, I also do have 2 old aluminum tilt dolls that are those large, heavy, solid that I could do anything with, and they'll outlast all of us.
I think most tripods will outlast. Well, not most, but most good tripods will outlast all of us.
And that's an important point because, you buy a camera, it's a temporary investment. if you want to use the word investment. Whereas if you buy a tripod, a good tripod, that is an investment and it will last you a long time.
That's true. So my advice to people that are shopping for tripods is always buy the most expensive tripod you can afford. Even you don't have to buy $1,000 tripod that's going to last a lifetime. You can buy $100 or $200 tripod that's going to last a lifetime. It's going to last much longer than the $20 tripod, and it's going to work. And that's the thing that you need to do, is find one that works, not just the cheap option to check the tripod block. You want to make an investment here because the tripod's going to last longer than your camera. It's going to last longer than your lenses. If a good tripod can get passed down to your children, I promise you tripod technology is not going to make a modern tripod obsolete in 2, 4, 20, 50, 100 years. Tripods 100 years from now are going to look very similar to the ones you use today. So
let me jump in, guys. Can we talk a little bit about, you mentioned attaching heads. So can we talk about really quick about plates, Arca Swiss plates specifically, and maybe give people just a general idea of what that is? Todd, you had mentioned also the plates that you need to attach heads on your tripod. What do you use, and can you talk about that?
So a lot of tripod heads these days have what they call quick release plates, where you don't have to physically screw the camera onto the tripod head, which is a huge time saver when you're out in the field. The Arca type compatible is the most universal tripod dovetail plate that you can find. Most heads accept them. Some companies like Manfrotto have proprietary plates. Nothing wrong with that. You just kind of, if you don't have an Arca type compatible head, then you're going to have to live with proprietary plates, which is not the end of the world if you're into that system and you like the other features of the head. But
you also run the possibility, which I have, of grabbing the wrong plates for the wrong head and not realizing it until you're out there.
Yep, that's true.
So that's another thing. I'm a big believer in Arca Swiss, by the way. I think that those are terrific releases. They're available at different sizes or lengths, I should say, so you can get one that'll fit on your camera and not make it feel all goofy or have sharp edges in the corner of your hand.
And can you talk about the heads a bit, because there are obviously different kinds of heads and they have different purposes?
There's too many types of heads, but the most common is the ball head, and it's got a friction ball, a knob on the side. You loosen the knob, you move the camera where you want it, you tighten the knob, and it tightens around the ball. That's the general purpose all-rounder head that you can use for almost any type of photography. There are specialized heads for architectural photography, sports photography, as far as like a gimbal head for a long telephoto, and a three-way head, which is kind of the more traditional head, where you can move your camera in 3 axes independently with a different lever for each axis. The problem with the 3-axis head is they are a little bit more cumbersome, as when you pack them up and travel with them, because they have 3 handles sticking out the side instead of the compact knob on the ball head.
And by the way, a little workaround for that was that a lot of tripod carrying cases have pouches inside. And again, I used to use those pan tilt heads that had the arms, one for, tilting one way and one the other. I would unscrew them and just slip them into the inner pockets. Otherwise, they do get big and bulky. Also, if you do ship them and it's not a hard case, or if you're just traveling with them, if those things stick out a little bit, they get bent ultimately, and they don't work real well after that. So it's true. That's one of the nice things about having a ball head. There's also something else, depending on what you're working on, and that is a geared head. And they make geared ball and geared pan tilt heads, where rather than just loosening something and moving it and tightening it down, you actually dial it, and it's very gradual. And for, say, landscape or architecture or very critical compositions, those are nice to have. And many of them have sort of quick overrides to making fast adjustments. So that's an option too, but that's kind of specialty, but something worth investigating.
I know you mentioned monopods earlier, guys, but I do want to throw out the idea that, almost opposite of what you guys are saying. I like a monopod because I can move around with it. Just having a tripod there and having to get up and move to another location. This is specifically for sports, or even when I'm out in the field, or if I have a long lens and I feel I need that extra support. It's the monopod for me, because I don't want to stay in one spot, and I don't want to break the tripod down and pick it up. So just picking it up and walking with the monopod has always been an advantage for me. But thanks so much for that. Some really good advice all around. Let's move over to straps and bags. I mean, it's another giant subject, but maybe we can walk through it real quick and have some ideas. Allan, we were talking earlier about what you like when in a strap. So you want to start?
Yeah, a lot of it is really, really personal. I mean, there's all kinds of things. I mean, I know there are people that like the ones that are like 3 inches wide with big, paisley flowers on them and stuff like that. That doesn't really do much for me. What I look for in a strap, I like something that has a textured or a grippy inner surface that prevents slippage. Many coats we wear, in colder weather especially, have those slick surfaces to them, like ski coats and stuff. And a lot of camera straps, they just slide right off. So I like straps that do have a little bit of a grippy kind of a surface for that particular reason. Rope style straps have become popular. I don't particularly care for them. I find that they also slip and roll off me, as well as anything too wide. I don't want my strap to take up a quarter of my camera bag when I put my camera away too. It should be able to fold up and roll up and not take up too much space. One of my favorite companies is Optech USA. A lot of their straps, I find I keep gravitating towards them. They just address all the things I mentioned. And they also make really nice tripod straps, if I'm not mistaken. And that's another thing, a plug for tripod straps. If you carry around a tripod, a padded tripod strap is a godsend. That's my take.
Well, just remember, everybody, that, obviously your camera usually comes with a strap that are decent enough. And I actually have an older strap than my current camera, but it is a branded one. But there are many, many, many options. Black Rapid makes some really interesting camera straps and harnesses, and they're designed in a way that your camera can hang, sideways or backwards against your hip, which a lot of people like, and then you can draw it up that way. Todd, what are you using for straps?
I use a Peak Design strap, and it took a while to discover Peak Design.
Mm-hmm.
I think what drew me to them, besides the color, because I like the gray strap, was their attachment system, where they have these little, I know Peak Design has a word for them, and I'm not sure what it is, but they're basically tabs that you connect to your camera, and then you connect those tabs to the strap when you want to use the strap. And if you don't want to use the strap, you just click them off, and you can go out sans strap, which is it's nice to have that option and to be able to switch from strap to strapless pretty quickly. And John, you mentioned straps come with cameras. And actually, I think that's one of the things that camera companies do well, is they make good straps and that they include with their cameras. The downside of a lot of today's straps is they're branded, not only with the name of the camera manufacturer, but the model of the camera you're shooting. And a lot of people don't mind that. A lot of people have brand loyalty, and they don't mind wielding their Nikon or Canon camera strap. But if you want to be a little bit more discreet, or not stick out as much or not be as flashy, then that's when you have to go with an aftermarket strap that's a little more subdued and fashionable. I had a leather strap for years from a company, and I loved it, but switched over to Peak Design mostly for the release system.
In both straps and bags, there is just a wide price range. I mean, you can get very expensive straps that are just, practical items. So is it necessary to get something that's leather and beautiful? That's up to you. But the same goes for bags. I mean, you can spend a lot of money on a camera bag, leather or otherwise, or you can just use, pretty basic equipment. And I tend to go for the basic stuff, but there are a wide range, obviously, of bags and carrying systems for your gear, anything from backpacks for long trips to hip bags to messenger bags. And I found messenger bags tend to work for me. I use a Think Tank messenger bag, although I also have a backpack if I'm going to go traveling. And I now have a hard case by Manfrotto, which is a roller, and that helps in the airports and such. What do you guys use?
I have a Domkey bag, and I think it's my fourth Domkey because I keep wearing them out. Which
Donkeys don't wear out. That's a lie.
The straps.
You're not old enough to have worn out a donkey bag. I'm sorry. I have donkey bags older than you, Todd. They don't wear out.
Well, the bags themselves don't generally wear out. It's the straps. And the way you connect the strap to the donkey bag makes it difficult to throw an aftermarket strap on and keep the bag level. I think that's one of the shortcomings of those bags. But having said that, every time I wear out the strap on a donkey bag and decide to replace it, I've gone to B&H and looked through dozens and dozens of bags from dozens of manufacturers, and I keep coming back to Domkey because I like the looks of them. I like the functionality, the durability. I've just mentioned I wore them out, but I use the. Can we say crap on this?
You can say it. Yeah.
I use the crap out of them. So I don't think there's a bag that would last necessarily longer than the life I've gotten out of Domkeys. I mean, it's always disappointing to wear out a camera bag because when you buy it, you're like, this is going to last 20, 30 years. And then it makes it 4, 5, 6 years.
And what do you think about sections in bags? Because I've over the years have grown away from those, and I have, in a bag that I don't use, I have like every single one of those foam and Velcro dividers that I just never use. They're just sitting there in a bag, because I prefer a bag that is just an open space. And often I'll wrap my cameras and my lenses in photo wraps, in camera and lens wraps, which we can talk about, and just put them all in one open case. I really don't like those divided segments.
That doesn't slow you down. I mean, I've worked that way. I've had, color-coded wraps, so I know exactly what lens or meters or whatever it was just by looking at the wrap. But it does slow you down to get started and to clean up afterwards.
I have in my Domkey bag, I have basically one half of the main compartment is divided into 4. So I have 4 lenses dropped in there, sometimes 5 or 6, depending if I'm stacking them on top of each other, if they're smaller lenses. The other half is open. That's where the camera body goes, and maybe an extra lens or 2. And I find as I shoot, everything kind of gravitates towards the open section. So that'll fill up with lens caps, hoods, body caps, things like that.
That's true.
See, I'm a little bit further. I find that, I work with a 3-section bag for most of my just day shooting. Everything ends up in that center pouch after that. Everything.
Yep. I try to keep stuff separate, but the open compartment becomes the catch-all for the lens caps and hoods and stuff.
I have a large Tenba bag, or a fairly large Tenba bag, that has 4 sections for, it takes up half the bag for lenses. And again, longer lenses or a couple of smaller ones stacked. And what I do is I super glue rear lens caps back to back, and then I keep 2 smaller lenses in one pouch, and it's easy to take them on and off. That's another little trick I've been doing for years. Some epoxy on rear caps, you could double up. So in one longer section you could put, 2 lenses in. And then the larger area, that's the other half of the bag, is open, which will have a camera, usually a camera with a lens on it. And usually that's where everything ends up.
The one thing I like about the Domkey bag is that it has pouches on the ends.
Yes.
And not all the Domkeys have padded pouches on the ends. I actually took the padded inserts from an old Domkey, put in my new bag, which didn't have the pads, just to give a little extra protection. Lowepro makes some amazing bags. I've used them in the past. And then the last thought I'll give on this subject, or 2 thoughts. One is camera bags are like shoes. You can look at a shoe online and buy it at your size, and then it comes and it doesn't really fit, which is always a bummer. I feel like camera bags are the same way. They're very personal. So if you are in range in New York City, come to the Superstore, try out as many bags as you can. We have a ton of them on display. I would say more camera bags on display at the B&H Photo Superstore than anywhere else in the world, I would imagine.
Except Allan's closet.
So you can literally try hundreds of different bags to figure out what you want. Bring your gear, bring your lenses, drop them in different bags, walk around the store, try to figure out what works for you. And then the last thought is, one of the reasons I gravitate to the Domkeys is because I get the black nylon ones that have basically, they have no real donkey markings on them. There's no flare. There's no branding, no highlight stitching. They're just black bags basically, which that appeals to me. Not that I'm trying to lay low on the streets or whatever. I just want a black bag.
One thing I want to mention about backpacks is that my problem with them was that it's kind of always a pain to get them off and then to get into them and get your cameras out and work like that. And several of them have side access or even top access pockets that it's just one zip and you can grab your camera if it's right there. But I use backpacks really only to kind of store things, or if I'm going on a really long extended trip. And then if that's the case, I'll bring another bag with me and I'll use that for the day-to-day shooting, and the backpack will just be kind of a storage bag.
Hiking and biking is where I use them.
Right. All right, so let's jump on over to filters. And the order that we're going is generally random, I would say, but I did list them in the things that I think are probably the most crucial as we're thinking about accessories. So when it comes to filters, a UV filter is pretty common, pretty standard. People use that, to cut UV light, but also protect their lenses. And there's polarizing filters, ND filters. What do you guys use, and what do you think about the various brands that are out there?
I have many UVs. I will usually not keep them on my lenses for a couple of reasons. Number one, I do a lot of close-up stuff, and if you do happen to have some dirt on your filters, they're a little closer to the focal plane, and it does affect your image. And I do try to keep my stuff real clean. One of the pluses of a UV filter, and one of the reasons why I will often use them, depending where I am and what I'm doing, is that I've trashed lenses because I did not have a UV. I've been in situations where my front element got gashed, and the lens just wasn't worth fixing. Whereas if I had a filter, I could have replaced the filter. So I use those as needed. Polarizers outdoors, I really, really am a big believer in them. I think they truly improve the color, even if your goal is not to make greens pop and the clouds pop and water go dark or whatever. ND filters I'll use as needed. Otherwise, I tend to avoid filtration. I really, really do. I don't. My personal thing is I don't dabble with them that much at all. I use them for improving the picture when it's improving, but I find a lot of creative filters are a little bit too obvious to me, but that's my take. One thing I will say, don't, like a tripod, don't buy cheap filters if you don't have to, unless it's just a fast throwaway thing. I encourage brass rings. Quite a lot of filters have aluminum rings on them, and the front of a lot of lenses are aluminum. And aluminum on aluminum, when you're screwing things in and out, can actually weld. It's micro welding. There's a name for it. It's a binding, and you could jam them sometimes, and it gets real rough. So you have to make sure that whatever the filter ring is made out of, it's not the same as your lens. Brass is usually not used. That's my take.
Two filters that you can't really simulate in digital post-processing. One is the polarizer, and the other is the effects of a neutral density filter as far as capturing movement. So we'll start with the polarizer. Polarizers can enhance color. They can make blue skies darker, increase contrast in the clouds, and reduce glare, just like a pair of polarized sunglasses that you own and love. And like I said, you cannot click a button in Lightroom or Photoshop called polarizer that makes a photograph magically look like you used a polarized filter. So you have to actually use it. And then the neutral density filter has a handful of purposes, but one thing it allows you to do is shoot at slower shutter speeds in bright light, which can allow you to let a waterfall stream through a frame or let a car streak through the frame. It can allow you to do a long exposure during daytime. So smoke, moving water, things like that all get like a streaky effect, which can be really cool.
It's also very effective if you're shooting, say, in urban environments, and you don't want people to be identifiable or to be readily noticeable, because if they're moving, you could basically just have blurs, which suggest people without being literal about it. And it can be very effective, especially with architecture.
Right. I did a 15-minute exposure in the middle of the day in Times Square, and it looks like there's only 2 or 3 people in Times Square because those are the only 2 or 3 people that didn't move for 15 minutes.
Those were the 2 bodies.
Yep.
Yep. That's how they find them. They do time exposures a few times a day, and they feel, all right, which one didn't move? Okay, go check. Give a kick.
And Allan mentioned briefly creative filters, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of color filters and creative filters aren't used as much as they used to be, given the digital cameras and the effects that they can create and what you can do in post-process. But for a long time, I used to use, I guess I don't know if they're called twilight filters, but the kind that give you the little starlights everywhere on the lights, and those are kind of fun. So it is a way to kind of dig into some creative applications if you want to try new things. But I think for the standard usages, for most photographers, you have your UV for protection, and then the 2 that you mentioned, for use, especially if you're wildlife photographers and outdoor photographers. Can we jump over to adapters, which is a giant category? All of these are giant categories, really, that we're going through pretty quickly. But adapters are that they adapt lenses to cameras that aren't from the same brand necessarily or with the same mount. And B&H sells a wide range. And if you look on the internet, you can find all kinds of all different price ranges. Some have electronic compatibility between the cameras and the lenses. Others don't. But it is a way to really explore old lenses and to be creative and find, as Allan likes to say, signature looks with lenses and use them on modern cameras. And I know, Allan, you use that a lot. What do you think about adapters and what's your thoughts?
I live and die by them. I currently shoot with a Sony camera, an A7R3, and a Leica M10 monochrome. And I currently do not own any Sony lenses. I currently do not own any Leica lenses. I use from a lot of other manufacturers, new and old, some real simple and some more complex and goofy. And I use adapters where I could use all of my lenses. And I have lenses I have Zeiss reflex lenses with Nikon mounts and Contax mounts. I have Voigtlander lenses, Nicors for Nikon, and a few others. And I have a bunch of adapters, and I could use each of those lenses on either camera, depending on what I'm doing. And again, like you said, the signature, what I want the picture to look like, what I'm trying to do with my camera and lens.
And what do you look for in an adapter? I mean, what are some of the features that will put it on the good side or the bad side for you?
Good construction, and by the way, I want to qualify that. I have a couple of $25 lens adapters that are dead on. Okay. That's not always the rule. I find that if you buy the better ones, better made, a little bit more accurate, I don't want to put the lens on and have any kind of wobble going on. That's your clue. If you put your lens and adapter on the camera body and there's some wobble in there that was not there when you put the lens on the original camera, that's not a good sign. There are a lot of these coming to market right now. There are adapters that have built-in helicoids, usually about 4 millimeter, which means by dialing the outside of the adapter barrel, you could extend the lens like an extension tube, which increases or decreases your minimum focusing distance with any lens that you're using. And I like that because I have a lot of Leica M mount lenses, which do not focus close, but I could use them on my Sony with a Voigtlander VME adapter, and now I could focus in within inches instead of a couple of feet, which is really cool. I mean, it opens up all kinds of possibilities.
And Todd, what about you on adapters?
So I think when you talk about accessories, there's things that are almost mandatory to have, like a strap, a tripod, things like that. Adapters are only mandatory if you are in the camp where you're adapting lenses. And if you're shooting a mirrorless camera and not adapting lenses, you're kind of missing out on a huge world of photographic possibilities by using different types of lenses through an adapter. And for people starting out in photography or getting their first camera, nobody goes and buys a Canon mirrorless camera or a Nikon mirrorless camera and then says, I want to shoot Pentax lenses or something, like nobody does that. You just buy your Canon body and your Canon lenses and life is good. But if you are looking to expand your photography or, experiment with different types of lenses, then the adapter becomes a necessary accessory. The other thing is if you do switch systems, like I used to shoot Nikon, I now shoot Fuji. I didn't give up all my Nikon glass when I switched to Fujifilm. So I have a Nikon to Fujifilm adapter, and I still use some of my Nikon lenses on my Fujifilm camera. And it's a lot of fun to use an old manual focus Nikon lens on a modern mirrorless camera with focus peaking and some other focus aids.
And and some adapters have electronic communications between lenses and cameras, and most don't. Do either of you have an adapter that does that? That does provide that kind of electronic connection?
I have in the past. Currently, no. But the cameras often make up for it. Like Todd mentioned, there's focus peaking that you can use. With both of my cameras, I could zoom in for manual focusing. And by the way, all of my lenses are manual focus right now. I don't think I have any autofocus lenses, which is okay. But there are a lot of aids built into the cameras.
Right. But autofocus, is one of those things you may have to give up if you're using adapters, depending on the camera, the lens, and the adapter. But some of the modern conveniences, if you want to call them that, become they're not available when you're adapting lens to camera.
No, I think there are a lot of adapters that allow auto exposure, autofocus compatibility between different lenses and bodies. But I think the traditional sense of the adapter is you're adapting older lenses, which are manual focus and have aperture rings. And that leads me to say, like, a lot of the newer lenses, and I say newer as in the last 20, 30 years, don't have aperture rings on them to manually select the aperture. So that's something to consider when you're using an adapter, is you might not be able to adjust the aperture of that lens. Some adapters are rigged so that you can still adjust the aperture if there's no separate ring or mechanical connection, but not all.
No, I hear what you're saying, Todd. And yes, these adapters do offer that kind of connection, but you do need to get the adapter, and you need to add that little bit of weight and that tiny bit of length, which, to your point, Allan, maybe it takes away the advantage of the weight of the new mirrorless lens, or the lighter weight of a new mirrorless lens. Let's jump on over, if we can, to camera protection, which I have listed here as, rain and weather protection, silicone jackets to protect from bumps, even lens hoods and cleaning of your cameras. Any thoughts on what's important and what you should buy, and what do you guys use?
Ooh, I push my luck with my stuff. I'm a big fan. Yeah. Well, my equipment used to get doused with salt water regularly. I mean, come on. I once had a guy, actually, I was trading a camera. He actually sniffed it and he says, "You've been near the ocean lately." Anyway, I like using a half case, depending on the camera, because it does give some protection to the camera from bumps and bangs and dings. And I like the ones that are a little bit better, that give you access to, memory cards and batteries without having to take everything apart. That's pretty much what I use. I use lens shades whenever I can, although I will leave them home if basically it makes my bag impossible to pack properly. And I don't like popping them on an awful lot with reversing and all that stuff. Sometimes I just leave them home because they just take up too much room. So that's my take on it. Otherwise, I really like having as tactile feeling to the camera as possible. The least between me and the camera, the better off it is. That's my take.
I own a rain cover for my camera. I don't think I've used it ever. I guess the day I'll use it is the day I know that I'm going to be stuck outside doing photos and there's no other option. But I've left cameras out in rainstorms before on tripods and heavy rain. non-waterproof, non-weatherproof cameras, and
Same here.
They survived somehow. So
Mm-hmm.
solid state electronics are pretty good. I'm not telling you to go out and leave your put your stuff under the sprinkler to see if it still works, but don't get super paranoid if it starts drizzling or a rainstorm comes through and your stuff's not in a watertight bag. It's usually going to be fine. But
right. So really, really bad advice then. Great, guys. Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I will say, with the turnover in digital technology, a lot of us buy cameras and we only use them for 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
I was going to say 3 to 5.
Yeah. So if you're going to be turning the camera in or selling it to B&H or something, and you want to make sure it looks as good used as the day it was new, then putting a silicone bumper around it is not the worst idea in the world, because you're gonna want it to look nice so you can maximize your dollar when you trade it in. But
well, a lot of people, maybe not enthusiasts or pro, do keep cameras for a long time, and any kind of protection like that will help. But I also want to mention the fact that, despite what you guys are saying, there are photographers who will be sitting out in the rain, or sitting out in the elements and working. And, many companies make covers, rain specifically covers for long lenses. And again, we're talking about sports photographers and wildlife shooters. And these things they're pretty important. I mean, for these type of people who basically are not going to, we're not talking about just a little bit of a spritz. We're talking about they're out there and they're staying out there. A couple of brands to think of if you're looking for camera protection. Lens Coat, makes sizes for long lenses, short lenses.
They make for everything.
And Think Tank, even Rugged. And again, these run the price range from something that really is just a piece of plastic to something that, has straps that can tie down and is Gore-Tex. So you can, again, depending on the type of work you're doing and how much time you spend out in the elements, you need to take a look at these things.
Okay, we are going to take a short breather, and we come back more on accessories with John Harris and Todd Vorenkamp. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back. By the way, I want to point out that today's episode, we're talking about accessories. These are not studio-centric accessories. That's a whole other topic. Just a good example, like we were talking about camera supports. There are huge stands that are available that are serious camera supports from companies like Cambo and Foba. We're not going to get into that. Ditto that for lighting. We're going to talk about some of the lighter weight run and gun travel, day tripping kind of stuff. If you want to talk about studio lighting, that's a whole other topic, a whole other show for another time. So again, today it's all going to be run and gun, travel, running around, having day tripping kind of accessories. That said, our first topic on this half of the show is going to be memory cards, hard drives, and readers. Let me sum it up. Last week's show is all about memory cards, hard drives, and readers. So just go back to listen to last week's episode, take some notes, and you got it. Okay. Anyway, on a more serious note, Todd, any thoughts on memory cards, hard drives, or readers?
So most cameras these days use SD cards. There's still some compact flash out there, and then there's
XQD and CF Express are kind of the new ones. Yep.
Yeah. There are compatibility considerations. So if you have an older camera that takes SD cards, it might not take the latest and greatest.
And not all backward compatible. You have to be careful of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I do is a safe bet is go to B&H website, go to your camera body and look at the accessories for that camera body, because they will be listed. The memory cards listed there will be compatible to what you have.
And, of course, there's a whole range of capacity. You can get memory cards from, 8 gigs Up 64 gigs. The range is extensive on both sides, and obviously it's growing every year, and prices stay relatively low, at least for SD cards. So kind of consider what you need in terms of a size.
Well, that was the recommendation we had last week. Stick to 64s and 128s. And yes, you can get them with a lot greater capacity. But if something goes south on the card, and again, these are devices that can have problems. They're amazingly accurate and reliable, but they can go south. You don't want to lose too much data. And again, it's a whole thing about that. So maybe and they're cheap as all heck right now. It's amazing how inexpensive they are to buy more of the smaller cards.
I think card failures are fairly rare.
Yeah.
But when they happen,
it's the worst time.
It's the worst possible time. You're a pro shooter and you just did a wedding or you just did a huge thing for a client. And then, so a lot of people make a big deal about dual card slots on your camera. I personally don't ever shoot both slots at the same time. Having said that, if it's critical, definitely shoot, fill 2 cards at once, have a backup. And then when it comes to size, like a lot of us started with 4 gig cards and then 8 gigs, and wow, 16, that's amazing. And now,
I remember when they hit 1 gig.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I do remember.
512 megabyte
512 was a big deal.
Yeah. So it's always tempting, if you have a 64 gig card, it's always tempted to fill that card up with several thousand images. There's something to be said for using a smaller card and having the discipline to upload it when it gets full or close to full.
You'll get better service out of the card by doing that. But I would say buy as fast as you can. That will still work with your current camera, because without a doubt, the next camera you buy will take advantage of all that extra speed that you don't necessarily need today.
Right. Exactly. The other thing is if you do buy a slower card or you have older cards that are slower, you will notice a decrease in performance in your camera.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always something to pay attention to.
Yeah, it's absolutely important to take a look at, the speed of your memory card and know what kind of shooting you're going to be doing. The other thing to talk about is what you guys hinted at, is that you really should always have a backup, whether it's in the second slot of your camera or in your bag, because, if it fails, it's, there's nothing you can do. So you really should have a backup with you at all times. And, jumping over to card readers, a lot of laptops obviously have slots for SD cards. You can put them directly into your computer, but, a reader is something that's pretty important, obviously, if you want to get your information from your card to your computer. And there's a range of those, in several, they're very affordable. So, you can find something that works for you. Touching on hard drives is a much bigger subject. And I totally agree with Allan. Listen to last week's show because we had some great information there. But a hard drive is something you're going to have just to store your photos, and let alone to keep them off of your laptop while you're working so that you can work faster on your laptop.
Yeah.
There are SSD hard drives that are very fast now, and the capacity is giant. So take a look at those.
Sure.
Yeah. I have a stack of SSD drives right next to me on my computer desk. And it used to be I would basically fill up my hard drive with photos and then I have to move everything to an external drive. Now, very few photos live on my hard drive. Everything runs off of SSD and plugged it through USB-C. So it's like my Lightroom catalog is on an SSD. It's not on the laptop, or it's not on the desktop computer.
Mm-hmm.
And that transfer speeds, everything, it's totally seamless. It's as if you were running it locally, but it's on a card.
Yeah, I think that's a really good best practice, and it's something that's advised by people who are in the know. Let's jump over to remote control. That's an important aspect depending on the type of photography you're doing. Needless to say, long exposure and light photography, portraiture. Those are disciplines that having a remote control is beneficial. And, there are electronic and there are, cables, old school. What do you guys use and what do you think? And maybe we can include in this section, just cables in general, because there's also tethering, which is more of a studio practice. But when you connect your camera right to your computer to see, on your monitor what you're
that's a
shooting in
studio
real
process.
time.
Sure.
But what do you guys use when it comes to remote control, and what other cables do you find important?
I use for any camera that has a threaded release. First of all, any camera, just about every camera I own right now has built-in time delays. So that negates the need for remote control if I want to eliminate camera shake and not be touching the camera when it goes off. So I'll use that quite often if I'm working in a studio. Alternatively, if it's a threaded shutter button, I really like old school cable releases because I don't always want that little delay, especially if I'm shooting outdoors and I'm waiting for specific moments. I want to nail it when it happens, but I don't want to touch the camera. And they're available, 1 foot, 2 foot lengths, different lengths. And for cameras that don't have that, I have a couple of those really inexpensive remotes. They're third party from Gratis. We sell them at B&H. And I have a couple I work with my Sony, and just with a little battery operated thing, I could trigger my camera remotely. That's the extent that I use them for.
So I'm kind of with Allan. If you have a threaded shutter, the Nikon AR3 shutter release is the most beautiful, smooth actioned, mechanically perfect mechanical shutter release on the market.
Yeah, no, so, I'll back you on that one. Absolutely, it's been made forever. Yes.
Yeah, it's perfect. I've tried other brands. I've had, my dad used to have an old one, and nothing feels quite like that AR3. I don't know why. So even if you're not using it to take pictures, you can just play with it, and it's good for fidgeting.
It is, especially that lock release, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a cool piece of machinery. And Allan alluded to it. You can use a tripod to gain all types of worlds of support for your camera. But if you're punching the shutter button when you're taking the picture, you're kind of negating the whole purpose of the tripod. So you want to have a release. And if you don't have a release, use the timer at 2 or 10 seconds. The disadvantage of using the timer is that you're going to be waiting 2 seconds between shots. Mm-hmm. So if you have a release, great. If you left it in the car, if you left it at home, use the timer. But don't punch the shutter button when you're mounted on a tripod.
Remember also that a lot of, you can use apps on your phone to trigger your camera as well.
Yeah.
That's available.
Yep.
So there are a bunch of releases that have timer functionality, interval shooting functionality, and stuff like that. Luckily, a lot of that stuff is now built into cameras. So you don't need to get the high-tech releases all the time. But if you do need them, you know who you are, and go for it. Yeah.
Any other cables that you guys use a lot? I mean, even when it comes to, transferring images or powering your cameras. How do you take batteries out and use chargers, or how do you?
What other cables I have all the manufacturer's chargers. I always have at least 2 or 3 batteries for each of my cameras, and I try to rotate them on a regular basis. And one thing I also do, I buy whenever I can. I'm actually up to date right now. I buy one spare battery, and I buy the original manufacturers for each of my cameras, and I put them away, because certain cameras, like you might want to have a little bit longer than others. And one of the weak spots down the line is that there are some great old cameras out there that I wouldn't mind using, but you can't get batteries for them anymore. I want to make sure that 10 years from now, I'm going to have no problem putting a battery in my M10 monochrome. So I want to get my money's worth out of that thing.
Allan mentioned that he always buys the manufacturer's battery, because there are a lot of options out there to buy third-party batteries that do work with your camera, but usually, the charges doesn't.
And let me put an asterisk on that too, okay? Because I have had third-party batteries that perform perfectly well, but I've also had situations where I bought 2 or 3 of them of the same battery at the same time, and they don't perform the same way. They don't hold the same amount of charges, and they're not as reliable. So it's the inconsistency of it. It's not that they're all bad. It's just that I find, even though they cost a lot more, I find the original manufacturer's batteries to be more consistent.
Yeah. You get longer battery life, more reliable performance from an OEM battery. But having said that, they are expensive, and you can pick up 2 or 3 aftermarket ones for the price of an OEM battery. And sometimes that's a worthy sacrifice.
You know what? Again, if you have X amount of dollars and you're going to be hitting the road and you need more than one battery, that is excellent advice.
Yeah. It's not like cheaping out on a filter or cheaping out on a lens or cheaping out on a tripod. Like a battery is a consumable, so you might get less shots per charge, but it's going to. You're not going
to miss the picture.
Yep.
Unless it's the very end of
the only battery you have.
I don't know about that. I've had some pretty bad experiences with third-party batteries, to tell you the truth. And I guess, but the same goes for chargers too, because there are the manufacturer's models, and then there are third parties, and I think it's parallel in terms of the same issues we're discussing. They just don't always
quite often the fit isn't the same. I mean, I've seen situations where there was one manufacturer, they made, I remember, was it the Nikon D700, I believe it was, and all their batteries, they were too loose. They were not quite the right size, so they rattled around inside, and the contacts on either end never quite touched at the same time unless you used it in a certain position, which is not the best way to have to work.
Right. I wanted to ask also about some, best practices in terms of storing your batteries and using them. Needless to say, cold temperatures can kill the life of a battery kind of quickly. So is there anything that you guys do in terms of keeping them, storing them, using them? How many do you take when you go shooting, things like that?
I number mine. That's one of the things. If you have more than one battery, unless you have some kind of marking on it that you know what it is. Sometimes you don't know which battery it is, and it's a good idea to rotate them so that your batteries should age equally. That's an important thing. If you're buying, say, 2 or 3 batteries, okay, you should rotate them in a way so that they're going to age at the same way. Because if say using one predominantly and only putting the other one when the first one poops out, and then immediately replace it with your favorite battery, your prime battery. All right, there's going to be a point where you might get them confused, and you might put a battery thinking you've got X amount of shots, and you only have a third of that amount, and it's just going to affect your performance. So what I do is I have a little label maker. I just put 1, 2, 3, and that's enough. And I know which ones they are.
Yeah, I do that as well. Yeah.
Cold weather definitely. It doesn't necessarily affect the battering performance. I guess there's a technical reason. It affects the output. So if I'm out shooting in cold weather, I will take the batteries out of my bag and put them in my jeans pockets or whatever, so they're closer to my body and they stay a little bit warmer.
Or if we wear a coat that has a breast pocket, inner breast pocket, that's perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Carry more batteries than you think you need, I guess, if you're going out for a long shoot, especially if it's cold.
Yeah. Although at a certain point, keep in mind also, your camera could get to a point where it gets too cold and the LCD stop working, but that's a whole other issue.
My hands and feet get cold way before that. So
yeah.
And okay, let's jump over real quickly to macro items, because we were going to talk about that earlier when you mentioned extension tubes, and Todd, you brought this subject up. I know both of you guys shoot macro a lot, and it is also, like many of these things, a subject that could have its own show. However, what do you guys use in terms of accessories when you're working macro?
I have to laugh because I just did a shot just earlier today. I was setting up a shot where I was using a Nikkor 55 macro, which goes down to half life size. Okay, and I want to get a little bit closer. So I actually had a combination of adapters. I put a Nikon to Leica M adapter on it. So it was now a Leica M mount, and I put that into my Voigtlander VME adapter, which takes Leica M to Sony. So I was able to extend it, and it wasn't enough. So I put a Sony extension tube into it to get to the closeness that I wanted. So I'm using like 3 different brand items in combination with one another. I use macro lenses a lot. I have a 55, I have a 60 and a 100. The 60 and 100 go down to life size. The 55 doesn't. I use extension tubes. I use that variable extender when I'm using M-mount lenses on my Sony, or adapting other lenses to go on it by doing one of these goofy hacks. And I'll also use the close-up lenses on occasion, which give a different effect.
Yeah.
I said there's two basic ways to approach macro photography. One is you have a dedicated macro lens that does half life size or life size reproductions. And if you want to carry that around with you in your camera bag, then you're good to go. But if you are the casual macro shooter who doesn't want to carry an extra lens just for macro work, but you want to have the option of shooting macro, the ways you can do it are, I think the best way to do it, I think, is an extension tube on a regular lens, because there's no optics in it. It's just basically a tube.
And it's very lightweight. It takes up no space in your bag.
Exactly. It's going to be the same size as your lens adapter, and maybe lighter. Or close-up filters, which are filters you screw onto the front of the lens, which is they're compact, lightweight, easy to carry as well. Optically not as good as a native lens with an extension tube, but they do have a nice, they create their own macro look.
It's a different signature. It's a different kind of look. And they're also more prone to flare because they have curved surfaces and you can't put a shade on them. So that could be an issue. Whereas macro lenses are usually recessed and you're well protected from flare.
And then you can dive deeper into reversing rings and couplers, but that's kind of like, you're going to end up carrying more gear if you're working on that. So the extension tube is throw a tube in your bag, slap it on your 50 millimeter or your 24 to 105, and you'll get surprising good close-up results.
And a lot of them are sold in sets of 2 or 3 with different thicknesses that you could stack. So you could have one that, like, a lot of kits will give you a 4 and a 10 millimeter or a 4 and a 12, and you could put them together for more magnification depending on your focal length of your lens. And they weigh nothing. They're very, very lightweight, and it's easy to stow away in your bag.
And one thing just to mention also when you're shooting macro is support. We talked about that earlier, of course, tripods. And
definitely. If you at the very least, if you have image stabilization, max it out. Definitely.
Let's jump over to lighting. And again, as Allan mentioned, this is not really an episode talking about studio work. So lighting, we're going to talk specifically about what you would use if you're, shooting a job, let's say in an indoor photo job, or lighting that you might want to use when you're outdoors. And fortunately, LEDs have come a long way, so they're small enough in some cases that they can go in your camera bag and you can use them for additional light if you need to, or if you're doing a portrait really quickly of somebody. Do you guys what do you carry with you when it comes to lighting?
Me, I carry nothing. I will sometimes carry reflectors. I have one of those folding reflectors, those flex fills that I've used on occasion. I have used very small pocket flashes just to open up shadows, but honestly, I don't use very much of that anymore. That said, if I was doing the kind of work that required that, one of the cool things about lighting these days is that aside from the usual speed lights that go on top of every camera, and they're all amazing and deadly accurate, either used on a hot shoe or wirelessly. What's, I think, even more impressive is that there are a number of studio quality lights where you get a 250 watt second light source that's the size of a soda can from companies like Profoto and a few of the companies that work either wired or wireless, that you could just hold in your other hand and aim a light. And they have very small light modifiers that are complementary to the size that you could actually shoot with one hand and light with the other. And a lot of them have LED and constant light, so you could see exactly how you're modeling it. So there's a lot of very amazing options out there for lighting on location that's easy to travel with.
I just to throw it in, I do a lot of work or news conferences and indoor events and things like that, and I just simply use Nikon speedlights that are available and adjust them to bounce off whatever wall or whatever ceiling, and I usually set them on manual to control it, and I do a few tests first to see how we're doing. And another point to mention is something you mentioned in an earlier episode, Allan, is that be aware of recycling times, because sometimes you want to shoot so fast that you're jumping ahead of the light and you're not getting the quality light that you want out of your flash. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, those collapsible and bounce, round reflectors. I use those as well, and often I'll have an assistant or just somebody who's available hold them to bounce some light if necessary. And Todd, how about you?
I guess it all depends on what kind of shooting you're doing. I carry flashlights in my bags, not necessarily always to help with photos, but so I can see in the dark. But they have been broken out to light up something. You can do light painting. You can, throw, if you're doing a architecture shoot, you can light up an area or add some light to a darker place. But the one type of light that I've really liked and have used on occasion is, those pocket-sized LEDs that I think not Allan kind of alluded to them, but they're like the Luxley cello and viola.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Where you can splash a good amount of white light, or you can change the color on them, so you can set some mood lighting or whatever. It's pretty. They run on basically they run on a camera battery. They're rechargeable, and they fit easily into a camera bag, and
they attach to the camera. They attach to the hot shoe, correct?
You can put them on a hot shoe, or you can just hold it somewhere, or put it on a table and have it shine where you need it. So
you could put them on a Gorilla Pod and just wrap them around a fence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe we'd like to hear from some of our listeners who are wedding photographers, because those are folks that really depend often on their flash units, and they'll have battery packs and a wire to their flash unit to keep that going strong and longer. But that's another option. Needless to say, if you're going to be using a lot of flash, you have have it attached to the battery pack.
I think speedlight technology today is so incredibly advanced compared to where it was 20, 30 years ago.
Refer people to our episode with Joe McNally, who's somebody who uses speedlights very creatively, and he'll have several on a shoot, and of course they can all attach. They can all be fired remotely at the same time. Or
nobody does speedlights like he does.
Yeah, definitely have a listen. One thing to keep in mind too is, as far as I understand, almost all speedlights are still powered by AA batteries. I mean, I think there are some that are now switching over to rechargeable, which is great. But if you're going to be using flash on your camera, you're going to still be needing to buy AA and AA batteries.
Yeah. Yep. Good point.
All right, let's jump lastly to software and monitors and color calibration and computers. And again, a huge issue, which we can't get into at all, but I'd be curious to know what kind of monitors you guys use and the software that you use to edit your photos.
Ooh, okay. I have an AIZO monitor. ISO, depends who you talk to. That's EIZO. It's an older model. And it's still deadly accurate. I use Spider calibrators. I forget which one it is. It's not one of the newer ones. I've had it set up where it's just working real well, and I'm afraid to change anything in the system because I'll never get it to work well again. But I know that with the picture I take and the image I see on the screen, and now the images that I print, I've gotten back into printing again. They all match, so I'm doing it right. But I think it's pretty important. I've been listening lately to a lot of people who are trying to sell art online, and they're photographing their artwork, and they say that the stuff they're taking, it's got all kinds of color cast. They don't understand that if you're using an inexpensive monitor that's never been calibrated, and you're making all of your editing based on the color you see on the screen. If the screen has a green cast or a magenta cast, all you're doing is correcting for that, so that when you take the final file and put it online or make a print, it's going to have a cast. It's not going to be accurate. So I'm a big believer in calibration and stuff like that, and to do it regularly, like changing the oil in your car. Don't wait for the light to go on or to somebody to complain about your prints.
I have a pair of Dell monitors that I bought because I got a new Mac Mini, and my beautiful, huge Apple monitors weren't powered by the new Mac Mini, so I was forced to buy new monitors, but they work great.
I use minis also, by the way, so yeah.
Yeah, I had was it like the 27 or the 30-inch Apple HD monitor, cinema monitor that was gorgeous and beautiful, and the new Macs don't power it for some reason. a missing line of code or something. Anyway, yeah.
And do you guys
I
prefer?
digress.
Do you prefer larger monitors? I mean, does that make a big difference in your work?
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally. I mean, I do photo work on it, and I do writing and schoolwork, and it's the bigger the better.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
All right.
I'd rather have one real large than two side by side. That center, the post going through the center. I love a huge palette. I love a large canvas to work with. I really, really do.
I like dual monitor setups. I kind of putting things on a different screen to like keep them in sight, but not really. So
Just put a piece of black tape down the center.
I guess I can do that.
And your software? Are you guys Lightroom, Photo
Lightroom.
Mechanic? What do you guys use?
Lightroom, Photoshop. That's pretty much where I live. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we've been going on for longer than we actually thought. And obviously, we have only scratched the surface. There's a lot to talk about. And also, to our listeners, if there are little accessories that you find are really important, let us know about it. If we skipped anything you think is important, let us know about it. This is most likely not the last show on the topic we're going to be doing. So get us some feedback. And again, we could use that as seeds for the next show that we'll be doing. And hopefully, Todd will come back and join us again with his thoughts. That is a wrap of the show. If you're not a subscriber to the show, we do have a quick fix for that. Simply head on over to wherever you snag your favorite podcast and sign up. It's free and easy. And if anybody asks, just tell them Al sent you. And remember, you can always find us on the B&H Explorer website and on the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group page, Apple Podcasts, and all over the universe. That said, on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.